cattle. Few people know the effect it has on Arizona's economy, but it has a huge effect on the lives of the people who work with, process, and sell cattle. Now, Arizona may not seem like a great place for cattle to be born and bred due to the hot and dry climate, but in this desert lies many places of water, grasslands, and what is potentially a great place to raise cattle, one of the many places being the Verde Valley. So how did the cattle business start in Arizona? How much money is in the cattle business? How does it affect Arizona's economy? All these questions can be answered by those who work with cattle, starting with Don Goddard, a part-time cattle worker and historian.
Well, actually the cattle come into Mexico from the Caribbeans in about 1600, and then through Mexico on into Arizona in the 1600s. Father Kino brought them in, brought 700 head of breeding cattle in. It was the first breeding cattle come into Arizona in about 1700. And he had missions built south of Tucson. And then in 1711 he died. And after that his cattle kind of went kaput, went wild. In the 1800s then the ranchers went in, and every rancher, everybody come from all over the country then.
And one of the families that came to Arizona was the Groseta family, one of the oldest cattle families in the Verde Valley. Andy Groseta took some time to talk about his cattle business.
Well, I'm a third-generation cattleman in Arizona, and my family was in the cattle business. We've been in the cattle business. This year is our 89 years in the cattle business. Next year, when Arizona turns 100 years old, we'll be celebrating 90 years in the cattle business here in the Verde Valley. But my grandfather quit working in the copper mines in Jerome and bought a ranch in Middle Verde. And they raise cattle, sheep, raise crops. It takes a lot of country to run a cow here in Arizona, and so we moved to this place here in Bridgeport in 1936.
The Groseta Ranch, or headquarters as Mr. Groseta calls it, is a great place for cattle and family to be raised. Quiet, serene, and with work always to be done, the ranch is an ideal place to instill hard-working traits in young family members of the Groseta family. Along with being a place of hard work, the farm also represents much of the money that is in Arizona's economy, as being one of the many cattle farms that has cattle on its land.
Really, cattle and coppers would settle Arizona for the mining industry and the cattle industry, and it's always played a big role in the state. Agriculture in the state is a $10 billion economic driver to this state. Just the cattle part of the total $10 billion, the cattle impact is $4.4 billion in the state. So it's a major economic driver in this state.
Even though cattle is a huge part of Arizona's economy, ranchers have faced many problems both in the past and in today's day and age.
Well, you know, the rancher has always had a problem. In the beginning they had the Indians, back in the 1800s they had the Indians fighting them. After the Indians, then they had Forest Service fighting them. When the Forest Service come in about 1907, they was cutting them down. And the rustlers was bad. In fact, 1901, the rustlers was so bad that they formed the Arizona Rangers, just on account of the rustlers.
Well, there are a lot of challenges. It's tough to be in agriculture. When we talk about the modern day challenges, we have Mother Nature to contend with. That's a given, and so we contend with droughts. We contend with sometimes too much water, moisture. That doesn't happen very often. Most of the time we're in the drought here in Arizona and the Southwest. Other challenges that we have in the cattle business, more so now than there's ever been in the past, are environmental regulations. We run cattle on federal lands, on U.S. Forest Service lands. Most of the ranches in Arizona and most of the ranches in the West run cattle on a combination of private lands, state lands, forest lands, and BLM lands. A lot of industry has left this country, the United States, because they've been regulated out of business. It's much easier to do business someplace else outside the U.S. because there's much less governmental regulations. Those of us who are farmers and ranchers, we're the true environmentalists of the land. We want to do what's right, and so it's in our best interest to make sure that we make that landscape very productive, and we want healthy, productive rangelands. The biggest challenges we have really to deal with is just more government regulation, and the reason that I've been involved in cattlemen's organizations and agricultural organizations over the years is that we have less government regulation, and really to make the business climate much better for not only the cattle industry but all small business people. It's so important in order for small business, and that's what farming and ranching is, and in order for us to exist, we've got to have a business-friendly climate. But sometimes I've seen other families been in business 3 or 4 or 5 generations, and they just throw their hands up in the air. They're tired of fighting all of these threatened and endangered species, where the agencies reduce your cattle grazing numbers. When they reduce your cattle grazing numbers, that reduces the amount of income that you produce off the ranch. So pretty soon it's not cost effective to stay in business anymore. And so ranchers sell out. And what happens usually when ranchers sell out, usually development comes in and takes their place. So yeah, you know, they talk about having more open spaces and things. I would hope that the American people would realize that if you want to continue to have open spaces out in the landscape, you need to keep the farmer and rancher in business, because here you've got a lot of open space, you run cows. As I said, it takes a lot of country to run a cow. So we need to make sure that the farmer and rancher stays on the land and not try to regulate him out of business. So that's the biggest challenge, is probably just government overreach and regulations and dealing with Mother Nature.